Good afternoon. I'm Anuj Mehrotra, the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you, our students, faculty, staff, alumni, parents, and friends of GW, to this special episode in the George Talks Business Series. We are streaming live our first virtual session as we continue to work remotely. As you know, we have switched to online classes, and the transition to online learning has been going well. I want to thank our students and faculty for the excellent adaptation to the online format. I also want to especially thank many members of the GWSB community who are working tirelessly at the front lines of the pandemic. This has been a great demonstration of resilience and has brought out the very best in us as GWSB community. We are here today to talk about a topic that resonates with all of us during this time of uncertainty: leadership, and how leadership was understood and acted upon in the past, today, and in the future. But before I introduce our guest today, let me first introduce our moderator. Dr. James Bailey is Hochberg Fellow of Leadership Development and Professor of Management at the George Washington University School of Business. Thank you, James, for moderating today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Our guest today is Ashley Goodall, an executive, leadership expert, and author who has spent his career exploring large organizations from the inside. Ashley currently serves as Senior Vice President of Leadership and Team Intelligence at Cisco. He is the co-author with Marcus Buckingham of 9 Lies About Work, a free-thinking leader's guide to the real world, one of Amazon's best-selling business and leadership books. Thank you, Ashley, for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, over to you, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Nuj. Ashley, thank you for being here. And by the way, thanks everybody that's tuning in today. Ashley, where are you coming to us from? Where are you at right now?
I'm in Montclair, New Jersey, in my home office in Montclair. And across the hall, my son is taking his second semester of courses at Georgia Tech virtually, as many of your audience is today. So this is the world we live in all of a sudden.
Yes, you're exactly right. At least you've got some sunshine there. My study is in the basement, so I just get the dark, clammy all day. But anyway, so let me start this way. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe a little personal, a little educational, some experiences that have led you to where you are right now in your professional career?
Yeah, so as folks can probably tell from the accent, I wasn't actually born in New Jersey. I grew up in the UK, came to the States in the late 90s, attended Columbia Business School in 2000. And when I was at Columbia, I was, as I think many of us do who go to do an MBA, thinking about a career change and looking around for what might be an interesting thing for me to pursue. And I bumped into this topic called leadership. In particular, a professor of mine, a leadership professor of mine, who was one of those teachers in life who awakens in the student something, some spark, some excitement. And so I got very interested in leadership. I found my way to the human capital consulting practice at Deloitte. I spent a few years there. I then moved into a series of human resource roles within Deloitte. And then in 2015, hopped over from Deloitte to Cisco, which is where I am now. And my role at Cisco is all things leadership and all things teams. And so I've made a profession out of trying to understand how you apply the best ideas about leadership, the best research about leadership, and the best ideas and research about how to build great teams in the world of large companies. And that's what I do.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this recent book with Marcus Buckingham, Harvard Business Review Press, and selling very well. 9 Lies About Work. Now, we're not used to seeing the term lies in books unless it's having something to do about the 9 lies about Cat's 9 lives, something like this. So this was sort of gutsy for you guys to pick this title. Tell me why you picked this title and give us a sense of what some of those lies are.
Well, I suppose we wanted a very strong word, and you're saying it's a strong word to put in a title, and yes, I would say that's not an accident. We chose it because it's a strong word. And the sorts of things we talk about in the book are deeply ingrained in the world of work and deeply felt to be true. And we wanted something that would push back pretty hard against these things. I mean, we talk about the fact that the best plan wins is a lie. That's not true. That the best companies cascade, the idea that the best companies cascade goals isn't true. That the idea that people need feedback is a lie. That the idea that people have potential is a lie. Now, you could go into most large companies in the world today and say, is it true that people need feedback? And they'd go, oh, absolutely true. Absolutely true. You don't grow without feedback. That's so we wanted a strong word to push back against these things. And also, the things that we write about have this interesting characteristic, I suppose, that they spread very, very quickly. So they are also lies in the sense, I think it's a Churchill quote where he says a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has its pants on. And so these things have this characteristic that they are felt unthinkingly and axiomatically to be true without ever so much reflection. And we wanted to say, hang on a second, look at the research, look at the evidence of your eyes, understand how humans actually operate, and you will see that there is more here than meets the eye. And in fact, if we want to help people grow and prosper at work, we need to start understanding that these things are not, in fact, true.
Okay, let me focus in on one of those. That's a very nice way to say that, but it also still takes a little bit of absorption, especially from someone who teaches leadership, who studies it, and you have sort of almost attacked a sanctum sanctorum within the leadership world, which is how critical feedback is. Feedback is gospel. Feedback is something that we tell all of our students you must engage in at every opportunity. There's no such thing as too much feedback. It needs to be constructive. We give people plans and methodologies for providing feedback. That could be through something like coaching. And I know as a teacher, at least I hope as a professor, that the feedback I give my students on their papers and their exams actually leads to increasing their performance in the future. So I wonder if you could spend a couple more minutes on feedback. And I'm sure your argument is more nuanced than it's a lie, but elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, so I think the place to start is to say, what does feedback look like in the world of work these days? Because certainly the world of work talks a lot about feedback and tries to do a lot of delivery of feedback. And most feedback looks at work sort of takes the form, gosh, you should do it this way, or gosh, try it this way, or do it like this, or you didn't do it right, or which is to say that most feedback at work is me saying, here's how you should go about doing that thing. With the thought that if you were to do it the way I'm telling you to do it, you would somehow do it better. So that if you unpack that a little bit, feedback, certainly in the workplace, consists of my saying, here's my way of doing things, and if you were to do it my way, you would be better in some way. So if that's what we mean by feedback, then you have to answer the question, well, do those sorts of things promote growth in a human being? And growth means, of course, movement towards excellence. So you have to understand excellence in that case. And as soon as you start studying excellence, and by the way, the study of excellence is still a sadly rare thing in our world. The study of what works is very easily pushed aside by people focusing, I think, a little too much on what doesn't work and failing fast and learn from failure. And there's a lot of faily stuff in the world, but not a lot of what works and how can we build on it. But if you actually do study human excellence, leadership excellence, performance excellence, pick a field, go study the people in it who do the best, produce the best outcomes, the best results, you'll find they all do so very differently. You find very quickly that excellence is idiosyncratic. And interestingly, the greater the degree of excellence, the greater the degree of idiosyncrasy. The better you are, the more unique you appear to be in the way that you go about doing something. So if I'm going to sit you down and say, do it my way is not going to be your way. And my way cannot be your path to excellence. It can only be my path to excellence. So that's one of the problems. Another problem is that actually my sense of how I go about doing something is different from your sense. We've all had the experience where somebody said to us, look, why don't you do it like this? And you go, well, I understand the words, but I actually don't understand how I would go about doing that. It would feel like I'm wearing someone else's clothes, and I could try them on, and I suppose they might sort of get comfortable after a while, but I can't make sense of your sense. I can only make sense of my sense. So what we argue in the book is that, in fact, a much more powerful thing, and something which would take up 80% of our time helping other people, not 100%, but certainly the preponderance of our time helping other people, is to devote your energies to the moments when they do something brilliant and beautiful, and interrogate those moments. Find what works for you as an observer, as a recipient, as an experiencer of someone else's behavior, and say, well, hang on, what were you doing there? How did you come to that conclusion? How did you frame that point? Where did that line of reasoning come from? Have you ever done that before? Is that one of your mental patterns? Is that one of your patterns of excellence, of high performance, of flow? Could you do it again? Could you do it in a different place? Could you do it more? Could you do it somewhere over here? Could you do it with a team? Could you do it with a spouse? Could you do it? How could you do the thing that works more? That's the question that provokes growth in another human being, much more than how could you do the thing that failed in a little less of a failure-y way. Now, there's a couple of exceptions to this. If someone missed a fact, then of course we can tell them what the fact is that they missed, because it's a fact. We're living in the objective world. If someone missed a step in a process that has a set of very clearly defined steps, and we know that, we know that in order to launch our video cast today, Troy, our producer, has to click a certain set of buttons in the right order, and he misses one, we can all go, hey, here's some feedback. You missed button 14. And so that's all well and good. Most of the world doesn't look like that. And our task as leaders in companies, our task as educators, is to prepare people for a world where they will be asked to do things, to invent things, to create things where there isn't a defined set of steps. No one can say, you always do that this way, because the people who are going to thrive most in the world are the people who can figure out new ways of doing new things. The only way to do that, moving towards excellence, is to hang on to what works and magnify it like crazy.
Okay, that's an answer that brings another 10 questions, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. However, I will say that you used the word failure-y. And I think that's a neologism, and I think that we ought to write it down, and we should submit it to the Urban Dictionary or other places, because that is an absolutely terrific word, or other failure-y things, I think you said.
I agree. But yeah, we could grab all that. And also successy is its antonym. People are obsessed with sort of successy things. I'd rather be talking about excellence, but there we go.
How about excellency things? Oh no, the excellency is already a word. I'm sorry.
You see, that's been taken. Yeah.
Now, I said something to you the other day when we were chatting that didn't you actually say something like leadership is a thing, not a person? And you came back at me pretty hard. You said, no, that is not what I said. And so tell me what you did say about leadership not being a thing or not being a thing.
Well, the last section of the book takes on, the last lie, in fact, is the lie that leadership is a thing. And again, with these things, it's maybe useful to sort of just step back and say, okay, what does that look like? What does leadership is a thing look like, if you're going to argue that it's not true? In the world of work, we like to create lists of attributes that leaders should have. We like to define the ideal leader in terms of characteristics of that human. And then we say, in order to be a leader, you must acquire the characteristics on this list that you lack. So, for example, we talk about strategic thinking, we talk about execution, we talk about operational skills, we talk about political savvy, we talk about relationship building, we talk about vision, we talk about oratory, we talk about things like empathy and vulnerability. And so there's a big long list. And most companies I've worked with or experienced have their version of this list, and the lists are astonishingly similar, and they're used for exactly the same thing. You sit somebody down and you say, well, we'll give you a quiz, or we'll ask the people around you to say what they think of you. And there are also problems with that, which we might not have time to get into. And then we'll give you your scores. And if you're high on strategy and low on execution, and you're medium on oratory, we'll send you to execution class, and we'll send you to speaking class, and you go join Toastmasters. And at the end of this process, if you can improve your scores, we'll give you lots of feedback as well, by the way, which you'll enjoy, really. It's not that painful. At the end of this process, you will be a leader. So again, you have to say, well, study the real world. What do we see in the real world? What's the evidence of our eyes? Think about people who are acknowledged to be leaders. Everybody listening can do this right now. So think of a well-known leader, and then think of somebody close to you who you would follow. And you go, well, do they have all the things on the list? And the answer very quickly is no, they don't. No, they do not. Leaders are not the most perfect of the perfect people. They are not shiny. They are messy and as messed up as the rest of us. And you think about Steve Jobs and all the sort of the intimidation environment that he very often created, or parking his car in a handicapped spot so that he didn't have to pay for a parking space. You think about Warren Buffett and oratory, and you go, well, there's not, he writes a beautiful annual letter, but put him on a stage and he's not a commanding presence on a stage. You think about, I don't know, we mentioned Churchill earlier. You think about strategy, and then you think about Churchill in the 1920s being kicked out of government because none of his plans worked. So it's actually very easy to go think of somebody we would recognize to be a leader, and now think of their leadership shortcomings, and you can almost always find them very, very quickly. So then you go, well, is there a more useful standard? And the more useful standard, I would argue, is a very simple one. Leaders are people with followers. That's it. There's nothing else going on here. If you have no followers, you might be beautifully well-rounded and good at an awful lot of things. You might be a wonderful, valuable citizen in our society. You're just not a leader because you don't have followers. And so we have to start asking the question, not what is the magical list of leadership attributes, but what do people follow in another human being? What do they grab a hold of? What do they hook on to? What makes me do this weird thing called following? And by the way, it's weird because I entrust some other human with some part of my destiny. I give extra effort to some other human. Why on earth would I do that? It's a very strange thing to do when you zoom out. And the question is, why would you do it?
I think you made a couple of good points here that I'd pick up on. One of the central questions I always put to people when talking about leadership is that the ultimate question is, why should anybody want to follow you? And that's what you have to really focus on. And the word want implies, of course, will. It implies volition. And you and I know this. Leadership is not something that we inherit, and we are not assigned our leaders. Rather, we choose our leaders. And so to understand that equation, we have to kind of put it, turn it over and turn it upside down and say, why would people want? Not why they have to follow you. That's answered by the organizational chart. But why they want to follow you willfully, that's another thing. By the way, for all of our audience, if you have any questions, you can please enter them into the chat, and those will get back to me via another methodology. Actually, a couple other things that you said about leadership and the failures, that none of us are perfect, and whether it was Churchill in the 1920s or all of the sort of idiosyncratic and occasionally eccentric behavior of Steve Jobs. Another thing I've always said is that good leaders should reveal their weaknesses as opposed to conceal their weaknesses, because we already know what their failures are, right? I mean, we already know what those weaknesses are. And if you don't, come out and get in front of it, it's a lot like that other Churchill quote, that rumor is going to get halfway around the world before the truth of the matter actually even has its pants on. And I'm really quite convinced that we like our leaders just like we like ourselves, which is flawed. Those
Well,
flaws, the thing.
so it's interesting that there's something wonderfully reassuring about that, isn't there?
Right.
So when you push a little bit and you go, well, why would you follow somebody else? What's the thing that you get in return for offering yourself in the service of another, if you like? And this actually brings us to in one way to the times that we're living in at the moment. But the thing that you get in return for following is a sense of confidence in the future. It is about confidence and reassurance. And so leaders are in the confidence in the future business. Now, there are a number of ways to be in that business, as it were. One is to actually be yourself, warts and all, because that makes you more predictable. If you are making it up and faking it every single day, people can usually get a pretty good sense of it. But also what's going to happen is that one day you'll fake it slightly differently than you did the day before, and the next day you'll fake it. And people will see inconsistency, and inconsistency is unnerving. It makes you unpredictable. What people want is predictability. And so all the signals that you can give people that I'm going to be here doing this tomorrow pretty much the same way as I am today, and I'm going to be here doing it next week pretty much the same way as I am today, that is the essence. That's the predictability. And what you find people hook on to fundamentally in a leader, the biggest predictability signal is excellence. We hook on to people who are excellent because their excellence, their ability to see around corners that we haven't thought about, the fact that they've taken themselves more seriously, the fact that they've honed what it is that they can do in the world makes them massively more predictable for us. And that's a beautiful price that we're willing to pay in return for our following. So leaders are in the predictability business. And to the extent that you as a leader can avail yourself of all the things that make you more predictable, which is essentially all the things that make you magnified, then people will follow.
Right. My colleague at London Business School years ago, Rob Goffey, oftentimes used the line that leaders need to be themselves skillfully. So he always added that on. So in other words, that authenticity, as you're pointing out, provides a kind of consistency. That consistency provides a sense of safety. That sense of safety diminishes the fears of uncertainty and allows people to move forward with a sense that they are being supported by their leader, by the people behind them, by their organizations. So tell me, you've got a big title, Senior Vice President of Leadership and Team Development at Cisco. I'd actually like to read that job description. There might not even be one, but can you give us a quick sense, we only have about 5 minutes left here, of what it is that you do? What's encompassed in that job?
Well, I'll tell you what, so a few years ago when I came to Cisco, we thought about how particular human resources was taking on the world of work, and observed that in its aim to, if you like, further the performance of an organization, the human performance of an organization, HR thought about people as individuals. And HR typically will design its process and its tools to recruit people as individuals, onboard them as individuals, provision them for them as individuals, train them as individuals, pay them as individuals, promote them as individuals, give them feedback, of course, as individuals. Individual. However, if you look at where work happens, it happens on teams. And it happens for the most part on teams with team leaders whose job it is to build a great team. And at Cisco, we said, well, we don't think nearly enough emphasis has been placed on that, nearly enough exploration, nearly enough experimentation. We need to answer the question, how in the world of work, certainly, how do you help leaders build great teams? Because if at Cisco, and by the way, we have 15,000 teams at Cisco, but if we were able to have 15,000 fantastic teams, we would be a lot less worried about the success of our organization and the impact we're going to be able to make in the world. So let's make a big bet, if you like, on teams and team leadership. And let's have that bet be informed by the best research and the best intelligence, if you like, that we can bring into the organization and that we can give to team leaders about how they're doing, and thence the organization leadership and team intelligence. So those three parts, leading in the context of a team with great intelligence, is the work that I've been leading the last 5 years.
Okay, all right. That's must have been sort of an unusual activity, sort of piecing those together and coming up with metrics and measurements and what you need to do. And you've been saying it again and again, how do you measure excellence? And that we should be focusing on that. And it's really very idiosyncratic, and it manifests itself very, very differently in every single different job. So I'm sure that's been part of your challenge. So one of the things that I know is that music has been a very, very important part of your life and has formed and shaped your thinking. So I have a question for you, and this is an exam. This is a quiz. There is a right answer to this, and there are wrong answers to this. If leadership were a form of music, which would it be? Orchestral music, classical music, rock and roll, or jazz?
Well, I'll tell you my answer, which is, I suspect, going to be wrong. But I used to be, as a student when I was in undergrad, I used to be an orchestral musician and then a conductor of the orchestra. So for me, leadership is symphonic music and leadership is conducting. And it's conducting because as a conductor, you don't make any noise. You're not making the product. The product is made by other people. And your job as a conductor is to make the space for other people, therefore, to perform, literally.
Do you want to know whether you passed or not?
You better tell me what the right answer is now.
The right answer is jazz. Because it's and by the way, I knew about your background, so I figured that's what you were going to answer. And no, ladies and gentlemen, we did not plan this in advance. I just anticipated that to be his answer. It's because it's improvisational. You can't write it down. It changes all the time. Everybody has to be very sharp and collaborative, and yet at the same time, when it's their turn to play, they have to be individualistic and soaring, and yet be able to hand it back off to another person to pursue a theme. And it just seems to me like leadership that needs those qualities, and where we've got a different metaphor that we'd be talking about if we were looking at orchestral music. So let's sort of wrap this up.
Maybe it's the same. Just one thought there. Maybe it's the same because what you're saying about jazz is the performance exists outside of the jazz standard that people are improvising on, right? So the performance is real time and is above the thing that we started with. If you listen to classical music, the performance isn't the score. The music isn't the score. It's the performance of the score. Which is to say that in the moment of performance, you have to take the guidance and the structure and whatever, and it is transformed in some way when you act upon it. And it's that transformation in real time with humans, all of whom have different spikes and different strengths, and all of whom are idiosyncratic. The pulling together of that in a moment of time, a precious moment of time, that's what we're talking about here.
Well said. We have just about a minute left. Do you have anything additional you might say to our audience about this moment, this crisis we're in? We've already talked about it, in terms of leadership. Our leaders are in sort of the uncertainty management business. Can you just say a couple more words about that, and then we'll head out?
Well, I think the simplest thing that each of us could do for the world around us right now is add some predictability to it. It's obviously not got very much. We're all in our own ways trying to find more of it. We can find more of it in the science of the epidemic. We can find more of it in the numbers, or of course we can find more of it in the people around us. So I think my challenge for everyone listening is, how do I build a little bit more predictability into my life? And how do I build a little bit more predictability into the lives of the people around me? either through a daily call or a ritual or sharing something that energizes or inspires me. How do we make the world a little bit more predictable? Because right now it could do with our help.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to the Dean. Thanks to everybody that worked on this production. We appreciate you tuning into the first remote George Talks Business. And mainly thank you, Ashley Goodall, author of 9 Lives About Work, a free-thinking leader's guide to the real world, and Senior Vice President at Cisco. Again, my gratitude belongs to you and to the entire GWSB community. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again soon.